I was 3 hours out when the island stopped answering. That was the first thing, not the smoke, not the acquisition hulk still holding position in low orbit when my shuttle broke atmosphere. The first thing was the silence on Channel 7, which was the island's medical coordination frequency, and which had never been silent in the 11 years I had worked there. I called twice. I got the automated handshake tone and then nothing, and I sat with my hands on the console for a long time before I made myself look at the passive sensor display. 9 hulks, still in formation, still transmitting on Quorum administrative frequencies, which meant they were still logging. I turned the shuttle around. I want to be precise about that. I did not land. I did not descend through the cloud layer to see what the island looked like. I turned the shuttle around and I burned hard for the Sorrel Reach transit beacon, and I did not look back at the passive display again, because I already understood what the logs would say. Compact Directive 44 Sorrel, Minimum Population Threshold Assessment. I had read it once, years earlier, when it passed through the Quorum's administrative digest. It had seemed like bureaucratic scaffolding for larger questions. What constituted a sapient population center? What protections attached? What enforcement protocols were warranted? It had a number in it. That number was 10,000. Any permanent human habitat below that census count was classified as a sub-threshold installation under Quorum Charter, which meant it did not qualify as a protected population center, which meant it qualified for resource assessment and acquisition. Sanctuary Island Voss had 6,812 residents, patients, mostly, people recovering from neurological damage, from crush injuries, from long-haul radiation exposure on the frontier runs, staff, nurses, 2 other physicians, the groundskeepers who had been there so long, they had stopped counting themselves as staff and had just become part of the island, the way the coral breakwater was part of the island, the way the morning fog off the Eastern Channel was part of the island. 6,812. 200 fewer than the threshold. The Quorum's records, which I read in full aboard INS Immovable Record 14 weeks later, listed 9 acquisition events, each one assigned to one of the 9 hulks, each one time-stamped and closed. The entries were clinical in the way that only something written by beings who had never considered that the number in their threshold protocol had a face for every digit could be clinical. AE44 Sorrel 001 through AE44 Sorrel 009, completed, resources transferred, installation decommissioned. They used the word decommissioned. I remember reading that word and feeling the cold move through me and settle somewhere behind my sternum, and I remember thinking that it was important to feel it settle, because the cold was something I could use. The grief was not. The grief had come and gone in the first 3 days aboard the transit beacon shelter, and it had been thorough, and I was not going to spend it again. I had 6,812 names in a file on my personal drive, pulled from the island's census registry before the Quorum thought to seal the administrative records. I had a use for those names. I was willing to wait. The veiled Sanction was not a fleet I had heard of before it formed. Nobody had. It was assembled the way Earth assembles things when it has decided that the answer to a legal instrument is a fleet, not a filing. Quietly, precisely, without announcement. 780 warships, drawn from 6 separate theater commands. The assembly point was the Callaway Drift, 30 light minutes from the Sorrel Reach beacon. I was told that Admiral Senti Harrell had requested me specifically for the bridge observation gallery of INS Immovable Record. I was told this as a courtesy. I would have been there regardless. I want to describe what 780 warships look like when they are assembled in drift formation, and the light from the Sorrel primary is catching the forward hulls. I am not sure I have the words for it. They are not beautiful in the way that people use the word beauty. They are beautiful in the way that a thing is beautiful when it is exactly as large as it needs to be, exactly as organized as the task requires, and not one ship more or less than the answer demands. I stood at the observation gallery window for a long time. I had my file open on the tablet in my left hand. The operation worked like this. 14 Vethrani Quorum administrative and enforcement nodes in the Sorrel Reach, each one responsible for some portion of the Directive 44 Sorrel operation. The hulks themselves had long since departed. The Quorum ran lean on dwell time, but the nodes remained: processing centers, administrative archives, 2 enforcement relay stations, 1 transit control hub at the edge of the Reach, all of it built on Quorum Charter, All of it logging, all of it operating under the assumption that the sentient threshold protocol was a stable instrument. Before the first node fell, INS Immovable Record opened a broadband transmission on all open galactic frequencies in the Soral Reach. Every quorum station in the corridor received it. Every independent transit hauler within signal range received it. The automated relay buoys at the Reach entrance received it and rebroadcast it outward. Lieutenant Commander Yael Oren read the first entry from the Quorum's own Directive 44 Soral log. Acquisition Event 44 Soral-001. Resource count, 762 units. Classification, Sub-threshold biological assets, non-sapient by Quorum Charter minimum threshold. Status, transferred. Then she handed the channel to me. I read 762 names. It took 11 minutes. I read them the way you read a patient's name before you start treatment. Clearly, completely, without rushing, because the name is not a formality. The name is the entire point. Afterward, I read their ages and their residency durations on the island, because I had that data, and because I wanted the Quorum's log to sit next to something it had no category for. The first node went down while I was still reading. We did that 14 times. 14 nodes, 14 Quorum log entries, 14 tranches of names read on open frequency across the Soral Reach. Some of the entries were small. The Transit Control Hub had only logged 41 names, the ones the Hulk assigned to its sector had taken first. Some were larger. I read every single name. The operation took 9 days. I slept in 4-hour intervals. I drank bad coffee from the bridge galley. I lost my voice on day 6, and Yael brought me a medical gel pack for my throat without being asked. And I thanked her, and I kept going. I want to be precise about something. We did not negotiate. We did not send a formal diplomatic communication to the Vethrani Quorum before the operation commenced. We did not advise them that the veiled sanction was in the Soral Reach. We did not offer them the opportunity to respond to the offense, or explain the directive, or argue the legality of the threshold protocol. We had read the legality of the threshold protocol. We knew exactly what it said. We had decided that the answer to a legal instrument was not another legal instrument. The Quorum had used the law to do this. We were done talking about the law. Each node was dismantled in the same sequence the acquisition events had been logged. That was deliberate. Admiral Harrell's operations order was explicit on the point. The sequence must mirror the offense, so that when the Quorum reviewed the after-action record, they would understand that the answer had been organized around their own procedure, that the response knew exactly what they had done, in what order, with what bureaucratic care, and had matched it. On the 9th day, the last node fell. It was a small administrative processing center. It had logged 219 names. I read all 219. The last name on the list was a man named Petros Adana. He had been on Sanctuary Island Voss for 4 years, recovering from a spinal compression injury sustained during a mining collapse on the Heron Belt. He had, according to the island's medical records, been 3 weeks from being cleared for discharge. He had a daughter on Callaway Station. She had been notified. She had given me permission to use his name. I read his name. I read his age. I read his diagnosis, and his projected discharge date, and the name of his daughter. Then I closed the channel. 780 warships in the Soral Reach, 14 nodes down, the corridor open, and empty, and quiet. I set the tablet on the gallery console. Outside the viewport, the last debris cloud from the final node was spreading slowly across the corridor in the Soral Primary's light, catching it the way all debris catches light, without meaning, without record, without any category in any threshold protocol, just material, dispersing. I picked up the tablet again. I still had the file open. 6,812 names. The Quorum had needed a number to decide what they were worth. I already knew what they were worth. The veiled sanction had spent 9 days making sure the Soral Reach knew it too. We left the corridor open. That was also deliberate.